Thutmose III's victory at the Battle of Megiddo. Thutmose III is regarded as one of the greatest military commanders in ancient history. He was responsible for expanding the borders of the new kingdom of Egypt farther than any of his predecessors. But his rise to power was precarious, and he had to fight hard to overcome rivals in order to get it. And he had to defeat a major coalition of enemies just to prove that he was worthy of being Pharaoh. This is the story of how Thutmose III won the greatest victory of his career at the Battle of Megiddo. After Hatshepsut died, Thutmose III came to power as Pharaoh of Egypt, ruling alongside his infant half-brother, Amenhotep III. At this point, the coalition of Canaanite city-states felt emboldened to rise up against the Egyptians. Thutmose's stepmother had kept them under control with her massive standing army, but without her to keep watch, they were free to declare independence. To make matters worse, Thutmose had to deal with rebellions in Nubia and the Levant. For 3 years, Thutmose III had to deal with these constant threats to his northern border, but he crushed them one by one, starting with Nubia, soon after he took full control of the government and made himself sole pharaoh. In the second year of his sole reign, Thutmose III prepared for his campaign against the city-states of Canaan. His objective was to capture the city of Megiddo, which had acted as a rallying point for the rebels. On the way, Thutmose III defeated the city-states one by one, including the important city of Jerusalem, whose king he subjected to tribute. However, he failed to catch the king of Kadesh, who slipped past his armies and returned to his capital in Megiddo. Now, Thutmose knew that it would be foolish to attack the city head-on because it was strongly fortified and protected by natural barriers on two sides. The western border of Megiddo was the Mediterranean Sea, and to the south, it was protected by a large swampy lake. Only 2 roads led to the city, both of which passed by the river Kishon, which could easily be defended by a small force. So Thutmose set up camp several miles away from the city and began planning his attack. He knew that if he wanted to take Megiddo, he would have to bring in heavy siege equipment like battering rams and catapults, which would take months to construct. It would also take weeks for his army to recover from the long marches. Taking Megiddo would either be a brilliant stroke of military genius or a disastrous waste of time and resources. There were 3 paths to the city, but only one that went through the mountains seemed promising. The other 2 passes were exposed, and it would be easy for the defenders to monitor and strike at with their chariots. Thutmose III's chief advisors believed that it would be too dangerous to try to pass through the mountains and instead suggested that he lay siege to the city and wait for the inhabitants to run out of food and water. Thutmose III thought this was a good idea, but he did not want to settle on a plan until he had personally scouted the area. So he left his camp at night and traveled secretly to the mountains. He found that the pass was so narrow in some places that even one chariot could barely fit through. He also noted that there were steep cliffs on both sides, making it almost impossible to climb. Realizing that this was a perfect place to launch a surprise attack, Thutmose decided to go for it. He left the next day and told his generals that he would meet them at a certain oasis beyond the mountains. After several days of marching, they finally arrived and were surprised to find no sign of the Egyptians. They then received word that Thutmose had reached Megiddo and was already attacking. While Thutmose III and his men were traveling through the mountains, a scout discovered the Egyptian camp and raced back to Megiddo to warn the king. The king of Kadesh assembled his army, which consisted of about 5,000 chariots and 2,000 foot soldiers. There were troops from Megiddo, Syria, Palestine, and Mesopotamia. The Egyptians had claimed that they outnumbered the Egyptians by 2 to 1. The king of Kadesh stationed an elite force of 100 chariots along the road near the pass to intercept Thutmose. But they were caught off guard by the Egyptians and were decimated before they could react. Thutmose III divided his army into 2 wings, one commanded by himself and the other by his general, Usermate Ra. Thutmose's wing consisted of 2,000 chariots and Usermate's wing had the remaining 600. When the Egyptians approached the river, they pretended to set up camp, Hoping to lure the Canaanite army into attacking them, the Canaanites fell for the trap and charged across the river. But as soon as they engaged the Egyptians, Thutmose gave the signal to attack. His elite shock troops attacked the enemy's center while user Merit struck the flanks. The Canaanite chariots were unable to withstand the powerful blows of the Egyptian chariots and they fled in panic. The Egyptian infantry pursued them, killing all who stood in their way. Meanwhile, the rest of Thutmose's army was pushing towards Megiddo, where the defenders were still unaware of what was happening outside the city. When the news finally reached the king, he ordered the gates to be opened and the defenders to ride out and help their comrades. The Canaanite reinforcements rode out to help their comrades and were cut to pieces by the Egyptian chariots. As the fighting grew more intense, the King of Kadesh became worried. He realized that he had been outmaneuvered and that his only chance to escape was to flee on foot. Disguising himself as a woman, he escaped through the city gate with a small group of loyal soldiers. With the bulk of the Canaanite army destroyed, Thutmose III entered the city and established his headquarters in the palace of the King of Kadesh. He stripped the palace of its treasures and used the materials to build a temple to himself in Karnak. As the sun set, the Egyptian soldiers celebrated their victory, and the soldiers of the coalition forces withdrew to the safety of the city. Thutmose III gave chase, but his army was exhausted and he did not want to risk losing any more men. He ordered them to camp out for the night and resume the attack at dawn. When the Egyptians returned at dawn, they found that the gates of the city were closed. Thutmose III ordered his engineers to build siege rams to the city walls and battering rams to break down the gates. But before they could begin their work, the Egyptians heard the sound of drums and shouting. The defenders had left the city and were attacking the Egyptians. Again, Thutmose III divided his forces into two wings and attacked the Canaanite center, but the Canaanites fought bravely and drove them back. After several hours of fighting, the Canaanites began to tire and the Egyptians gained the upper hand. Once again, the Canaanites fled and Thutmose pursued them back to the city. By now, the Egyptians were exhausted and hungry and Thutmose decided to lay siege to the city. He built a series of trenches and earthworks around the city and stationed his soldiers in them. Then he ordered his men to set up camp and wait for the Canaanites to come out of the city to surrender. After 3 weeks of besieging the city, the inhabitants finally ran out of food and water and surrendered to Thutmose III. The Egyptian soldiers entered the city and looted the palaces and temples, taking all of the valuables back to Egypt. The captives were taken back to Egypt as slaves, and the enemy chariots and weapons were taken as plunder. Thutmose III had won the greatest victory of his reign and had proven himself to be a worthy successor to his father and stepmother. After securing his northern border, Thutmose III was free to pursue his other goals, namely the expansion of Egyptian territory. He campaigned extensively throughout his long reign, conquering new territories and bringing them under the control of Egypt. He was also responsible for a building program that helped to make the Egyptian empire even wealthier and more powerful. Unfortunately for Thutmose III, his successor didn't share his love for building or campaigning. Thutmose IV started undoing many of the policies that made Egypt great, and it wasn't long before the empire collapsed. Thank you for watching. We hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe and leave a comment below to let us know what you thought. We've got lots of videos coming up about ancient Egypt and the other great civilizations of the ancient world. Thutmose III, a name synonymous with military brilliance in ancient Egypt, forever altered the course of history with his audacious strategy employed during the Battle of Megiddo. This wasn't just another battle in the annals of ancient warfare. It was a testament to the power of calculated risk, a masterclass in deception, and a defining moment in the history of the new kingdom of Egypt. Let's delve deep into the tactical genius that led to the decisive victory at Megiddo and uncover what continues to resonate with military strategists even today. In the 15th century BC, the Levant was a powder keg of shifting alliances and simmering discontent. The prosperous Canaanite city-states, long subjects of Egyptian rule, had grown weary of Pharaoh's control. Sensing vulnerability after the recent death of the powerful female Pharaoh Hatshepsut, the kings of Kadesh and Shechem, backed by the might of the Hittite Empire, raised a banner of rebellion. Their aim was nothing short of dismantling Egyptian influence in the region and establishing their own supremacy. With their combined forces poised at the strategic crossroads of Megiddo, these rebel rulers believed they held the upper hand. They had chosen their battleground well. Megiddo, situated along vital trade routes, was a commercial hub, and its possession meant controlling crucial arteries of commerce. But little did they know that their seemingly advantageous position was about to turn against them in the most spectacular fashion. Enter Pharaoh Thutmose III, a leader with a burning desire to restore order and protect his kingdom's interests. Though inexperienced on the battlefield, he possessed an intellect honed by years of planning military campaigns alongside his predecessor. Upon hearing of the brewing conflict, the young pharaoh wasted no time. He assembled a force of elite Egyptian soldiers, a blend of seasoned veterans and eager young troops, all united under the twin banners of courage and loyalty. Their journey to Megiddo would be fraught with challenges, forcing Thutmose to make a choice that would test his mettle as a commander. As the Egyptian army approached, they were faced with a strategic dilemma. 3 distinct routes led to Megiddo, each presenting its own set of challenges and opportunities. The first 2 paths, stretching over 120 kilometers each, were relatively safe but would elongate the journey, offering the Canaanites ample time to prepare defenses. The third option, the Aruna route, could travel time to a mere 40 kilometers, but lay through a treacherous mountain pass notorious for its winding trails and confined spaces. Convention dictated taking the longer routes, but Thutmose, driven by his need for speed, opted for the perilous Aruna route, a decision that would shock his counselors and change the battle's outcome forever. Maneuvering through the Arunapis was a daunting task. The towering cliffs on either side seemed to close in on the advancing army, making retreat nearly impossible. The passage's constriction forced the Egyptian troops to move in a single file, making them vulnerable to ambush or sudden attack. Yet Thutmose pressed on, his resolve unwavering, trusting in his army's discipline and prowess. And as they rounded a sharp bend, the sight before them took their breath away. Stretching as far as the eye could see was the valley of Jezreel, with the Canaanite army encamped in its vast expanse. The rebel coalition, boasting between 3,000 and 5,000 chariots, confidently awaited the Egyptian onslaught, convinced they had Thutmose III trapped. They had staked their claim to Megiddo's riches and their plans for regional domination. What they didn't know was that they were about to face an opponent who had sprung from the shadows, ready to shatter their dreams. Thutmose wasted no time. Seizing the reins of power as Hatshepsut's heir, he immediately began preparations to quell the rebellion. At the heart of his efforts was the summoning of loyal Egyptian forces from across the kingdom. The response was overwhelming. Charioteers rumbled, infantry fell into step, and soon the vanguard of the Egyptian army was thundering towards the northern borders. Leading this force was none other than Thutmose himself, his gaze fixed on restoring order to his pharaoh's realm. But Thutmose III's army was not just a collection of warriors. It was a microcosm of New Kingdom Egypt, reflecting the pharaoh's commitment to diversity and inclusion. Nubian and Asian mercenaries stood shoulder to shoulder with Egyptian-born soldiers, united in their loyalty to their pharaoh. The Nubians, known for their fierce combat skills, brought with them the traditions of their sun god Amun, while the Asians contributed their knowledge of archery and horsemanship, learned from generations of nomadic life on the eastern steppe. The Egyptians' march to Megiddo was fraught with difficulties. The terrain shifted from the familiar Nile Valley to the rugged Judean desert. But the army pressed on, sustained by their pharaoh's leadership and their shared devotion to the gods. Supplies were transported by a dedicated logistics team, ensuring the warriors were fed and equipped for the arduous journey. Meanwhile, in Canaan, the rebel coalition was a study in contrasts. The Canaanite kings, driven by a lust for power and wealth, united against the Egyptians despite their diverse backgrounds. Among them were the Hittites, renowned for their masterful use of iron weapons, and the Amorites, famed for their cavalry skills. Their alliance, however, was a fragile one, held together by self-interest and mistrust. Upon reaching Megiddo, the Egyptians faced a strategic dilemma. Before them stretched three possible routes, each posing unique challenges. The northern and southern paths were lengthy, exposing the army to potential ambushes. The central route, though shorter, led through the treacherous Aruna Pass, notorious for its confined pathways and hidden hazards. Adding to the tension, the Canaanite scouts were numerous, making reconnaissance a risky endeavor. In the end, Thutmose decided to defy convention and dared to enter the Aruna Pass. His reasoning was both audacious and brilliant. He calculated that the Canaanite rulers, believing Egyptian forces to be on the longer routes, would amass their troops near Megiddo, leaving the pass undefended. If successful, it would grant them a position of advantage, catching the enemy off guard. As the Egyptian army moved through the narrow pass, its size became a tactical asset. The confined space forced the troops into a tight formation, protecting their flanks and making it difficult for the Canaanite scouts to accurately report their numbers. By the time they emerged from the pass, the chariots of the Canaanite army spotted them and raised the alarm. But it was too late. Thutmose had gambled and won. Seizing the initiative, Thutmose ordered his forces into battle formation, positioning his archers and slingers in the center to repel the oncoming chariots and infantry on the flanks to prevent any flanking maneuvers. Then came the moment of truth as the Canaanite chariots charged forward, their hooves pounding the ground like thunder. The Egyptians, prepared and resolute, stood firm. Arrows rained down, disrupting the rhythm of the charge and turning the tide of battle in the Egyptians' favor. With their chariots neutralized, the Canaanite infantry attempted to flee into Megiddo, but Thutmose was ready for this contingency too. His infantry, swift and disciplined, pursued the retreating enemy, forcing them to form a hasty defensive line around the city. Realizing the gravity of the situation, the Canaanite kings rallied what was left of their forces and made a final stand. Yet Thutmose was relentless. He led a direct assault on the Canaanite leadership, aiming to break their resistance once and for all. The ensuing battle was fierce, a desperate struggle between two powerful forces. But in the end, it was Thutmose's tactical brilliance and his army's superior training that prevailed. The Canaanite kings were defeated and their dream of regional domination lay shattered. With the battlefield secured, Thutmose turned his attention to the city of Megiddo, laying siege to it until the remaining rebels surrendered. The terms were generous, a testament to Thutmose's magnanimity and strategic vision. The captured Canaanite nobles were granted noble titles in the Egyptian court, becoming bridges between the two former adversaries. The victory at Megiddo reshaped the political landscape of the Levant. Thutmose's reputation as a brilliant strategist and compassionate ruler spread far and wide, influencing the course of history for generations to come. His innovative tactics at Megiddo would echo through the ages, inspiring military minds with their audacity and effectiveness. For more insightful explorations into the world's greatest battles and influential figures, continue watching our videos. Each episode is a journey into the heart of history, uncovering stories that have shaped our world. Stay tuned because the next episode promises another captivating tale from the annals of time. In today's episode, we will explore the ancient city of Megiddo, located in what is today the Jezreel Valley in northern Israel. We will discuss why the Egyptians expanded northwards into Canaan during the Late Bronze Age, and how their control over Megiddo enabled them to dominate the region. So sit back, grab a snack, and let us travel back in time to learn about one of the most important cities in ancient Egypt's history. Welcome to my channel. Megiddo was not just another city for the Egyptians. It was the key to dominating the entire region. Why? Because of its location. See, Megiddo sat at a critical intersection between Egypt and Mesopotamia, controlling the main routes through the Levant. To understand this, let's take a minute to look at maps. If we zoom into the area, we can see where Megiddo was situated. It was right there in the middle, kind of like a traffic cop directing the flow of trade and armies between these two regions. During the late Bronze Age, around 3,000 years ago, the Eastern Mediterranean was a busy place. Lots of folks were trading stuff like timber, metals, and fancy goods. And Megiddo was right in the thick of it all, but it wasn't just about trade. Kings and conquerors also liked to use these same routes to get from A to B, and again, Megiddo stood right in their path. Whoever controlled Megiddo had a clear advantage over the others. They could stop trade or armies in their tracks or let them pass with a little nudge in the right direction. That made Megiddo more than just a city. It was a strategic gem, a powerful tool for any ruler who wanted to flex their muscles in the region. For the Egyptians, it was a chance to expand their empire northward. They already ruled over Nubia in the south and parts of the Levant, but they wanted more. They wanted to be the big cheese in the region. And controlling Megiddo was the first step on that delicious cheese. But why Canaan? What was so great about that particular area? Well, Canaan was like the teenager of the ancient world. It was full of energy, change, and contradictions. On one hand, it was religiously diverse, home to many gods and goddesses. On the other, it was fiercely independent, never fully submitting to any single power. It was also economically vibrant, thanks to its location at the crossroads of trade routes. In short, Canaan was a place where young empires went to make their mark. And for Egypt, it was the perfect testing ground for its imperial ambitions. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The Canaanites weren't exactly known for their chill vibes. They were tough, proud, and ready to fight for their land. Just ask the Israelites, who spent a fair bit of time battling the Canaanites before they, too, decided to call the place home. But Egypt was up for the challenge. They had a strong army and a whole lot of drive. Plus, they had something the Canaanites couldn't resist: shiny baubles and fancy clothes. Hey, don't judge, it worked. The Egyptians had a knack for making the rulers of Canaan feel like they needed a little extra sparkle in their lives. Before long, some of the biggest cities in Canaan were decked out in Egyptian finery, from the royal palace to the neighborhood temple. It was like a blinged-out fashion show, but beneath all the glitter, the Egyptians were forging a new kind of rule in Canaan. They were taking on the local lords and ladies and showing them who was really in charge. They built fortresses, set up shop in strategic spots, and even put their own folks in charge of local affairs. The Canaanites might have loved their fancy duds, but they weren't keen on being told what to do. And boy, did that lead to some explosive situations. We're talking rebellions, riots, and full-on-scale battles. The Egyptians had to fight tooth and nail to keep a lid on this volatile mix of cultures and ambitions, but they were persistent. Like a cat on a hot tin roof, they hung on to power until the very end. The Egyptians weren't just interested in ruling the region, they wanted to do it in style. They built massive fortresses in key spots like Megiddo, making sure they were visible symbols of their power. These fortresses weren't just for show, they were also practical. They had high walls, watchtowers, and enough space to house a whole battalion of soldiers. But the Egyptians didn't stop at imposing structures. They went all out, turning their fortresses into palaces. They decorated them with murals, statues, and enough gold to make any modern-day rapper blush. It was their way of saying, "We're here to stay and we're doing it in style." But even with all the bling, the Egyptians knew that their rule was a bit controversial. They had a reputation for being outsiders, for bringing their own customs and beliefs into Canaan and not always respecting the locals, but hey, they tried to play nice. They built temples for local gods and goddesses, hosted religious festivals, and even made offerings to appease the most powerful deity of them all. And then there was the art. The Egyptians weren't just painting pictures on the walls of their palaces. They were telling stories, stories of gods and monsters, of kings and conquests, and yes, even of the occasional Canaanite uprising. It was their way of recording history, but also of influencing how people saw their rule. For the Egyptians, it wasn't enough to just conquer Canaan. They wanted to transform it, to make it their own. They brought their culture, their religion, and their art, and they wove it all together into a grand tapestry of imperial ambition. It was a bold experiment and a risky one, but hey, without risk, there's no bling. Megiddo was a prize worth fighting for. It symbolized the wealth, power, and prestige that came with controlling the region. It was a jewel in the crown of Egyptian expansion and the key to their dominance in the Levant. Now, you might be wondering why the Egyptians were so eager to expand their empire northwards. Well, it's because they were a bunch of hungry, ambitious folks who wanted more than what they had. On the other side were the Canaanites, led by the somewhat less famous Lord of Kadesh. They were a coalition of rebels, a ragtag bunch of rulers who banded together to take on the mighty Egyptian empire. And you know what happened next? Egypt won big time. It was a decisive victory that left the Canaanites in tatters and the Egyptians on top of the heap, but it wasn't easy. The Egyptians had to fight tooth and nail to claim victory, proving that they were truly the ultimate Mediterranean power brokers. Now let's rewind a bit to around 1457 BCE. With the fate of Canaan hanging in the balance, Thutmose III and his elite Egyptian forces charged into battle. The chariots rumbled forward, their wheels kicking up plumes of dust as they raced across the open field. The infantry followed close behind, their shields locked in tight formation, ready to face whatever the Canaanite army threw at them. Meanwhile, on the other side of the battlefield, the Canaanite troops were equally eager for the fight. Led by their valiant king, they stood firm, their spears and swords gleaming in the afternoon sun. The air crackled with anticipation as the two armies prepared to collide. It was a battle of wills, a test of strength and strategy that would determine who would claim victory in this ancient showdown. As the battle raged on, it became clear that this was no ordinary clash of armies. It was a battle for the ages, a testament to the military prowess of the Egyptian empire. In the end, Thutmose III and his forces emerged victorious, crushing the Canaanite Rebellion and securing Egyptian dominance over the region. The annals of Thutmose III tell us that his army was so formidable that they completely decimated the Canaanite forces. The numbers are impressive, to say the least. The Egyptians took an estimated 2,000 prisoners, a feat that speaks volumes about the overwhelming force they brought to bear on the battlefield. No wonder the Canaanites didn't stand a chance, but the story doesn't end there. The Battle of Megiddo was a defining moment in Egyptian history, a victory that showcased the military superiority of their army and the far-reaching ambitions of their pharaohs. It was a battle that left its mark not only on the annals of history, but also on the psyche of those who lived through it. Now let's talk about what this victory at Megiddo really meant for the Egyptians. First off, it was a massive boost to their ego. The Egyptians were already pretty convinced that they were the bee's knees, the cat's meow, the greatest civilization in the ancient world. And this victory just reinforced their belief. After all, they had just defeated a coalition of rebellious Canaanite rulers, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that their military was the bomb. But it wasn't just about national pride. The victory at Megiddo was also a strategic masterstroke. By crushing the Canaanite rebellion, the Egyptians secured their hold over the region and projected their power farther than ever before. It was a clear message to any potential rivals. Don't mess with Egypt or you'll end up like the Canaanites. The battle also had significant economic benefits for Egypt. By dominating Canaan, the Egyptians gained control over valuable trade routes and access to important resources. It was a win-win situation. They could now collect taxes on goods traveling through their territory and plunder the riches of their conquered enemies. But perhaps the most lasting impact of the Battle of Megiddo was the shift in power it represented. The Egyptians had long been seen as the underdog of the ancient world, overshadowed by their larger, more powerful neighbors. But after this resounding victory, things began to change. The Egyptians were now a major player on the international stage, and their influence would only grow in the centuries to come. But that's not all, folks. If you want to learn more about the fascinating world of ancient Egypt, subscribe to my channel for more updates. And if you've got any burning questions about Egypt's imperial ambitions, leave them in the comments below and I'll do my best to tackle them in future episodes. Until next time, happy unboxing! The Battle of Megiddo, sometimes called the Battle of the Great Kings, was one of the most important battles in ancient Egypt's history. It was fought around 1457 BC between the Egyptian army of Pharaoh Thutmose III and a coalition of Canaanite kings. The Egyptians won a brilliant tactical victory thanks to Thutmose's daring decision to use a secret mountain pass to catch his enemies by surprise. But why did he choose this dangerous route? Was it just luck or was there a deeper reason behind it? In this episode, we'll explore why Thutmose III chose the direct route to Megiddo. To understand the Battle of Megiddo, we need to first understand the context. For several decades before Thutmose III took the throne, Egypt had been ruled by Queen Hatshepsut, who expanded trade and built huge building projects. But after she died, her successor, Thutmose III, Hatshepsut's stepson, came to power. He soon realized that the prosperity of Egypt depended on its ability to protect its far-flung trading posts. And to do that, he needed to put down a rebellion that had broken out in Canaan, a region that bordered Egypt to the northeast. The rebels were led by the powerful King of Kadesh, who had taken advantage of Hatshepsut's long absence from affairs in Canaan to build up his own power base. If Thutmose wanted to restore order in Canaan and secure Egypt's borders, he would have to face the King of Kadesh in battle. And so he assembled an army of 60,000 men and marched north to confront the rebels. Thutmose's army advanced rapidly, capturing city after city until he reached the town of Yam, where he made camp. At this point, his generals urged him to turn back. They argued that the Egyptian army had already suffered significant casualties and that it would be best to regroup and try again another day. But Thutmose refused to listen to them. Instead, he decided to press on to Megiddo, the seat of the rebel king's power. To reach Megiddo, however, Thutmose had to make a choice about which route to take. There were 3 routes in all, each with its own advantages and disadvantages. The first route was through Tanaj, a city about 18 miles away. This route was wide and well-traveled, but it was also heavily defended by the Canaanites. The second route was through Dothan, a city about 30 miles away. This route was safer, but it would take longer to travel, which meant that the Egyptian army would have to stay in the field longer and consume more supplies. The third route was through the Aruna Pass, a narrow mountain pass about 12 miles away. This route was the most dangerous, but it was also the most unpredictable. The Egyptians could not know how well the Canaanites had fortified the pass or whether they had placed any traps along the way. In the end, Thutmose chose to take the third route through the Aruna Pass, and so he led his army along the narrow path, which wound through steep cliffs and rocky outcrops. After about 6 hours of marching, the Egyptian soldiers began to grow weary. They had been fighting for weeks and they were eager to reach their destination, but Thutmose refused to let them rest. He knew that the Canaanites were waiting for them in Megiddo and he wanted to arrive there before they were ready. Finally, as the sun began to set, the Egyptian army emerged from the pass and into the Jezreel Valley. They had made it to Megiddo. At this point, Thutmose could have rested his army and prepared for a siege. But he had only one thing on his mind: destroying the rebel king's army once and for all. So he divided his forces into 2 groups and attacked. The first group, consisting of 30,000 infantrymen and 20,000 horsemen, charged straight for the city gates. The second group, consisting of 10,000 infantrymen and 10,000 horsemen, circled around to the east of the city. Then, as the Canaanite defenders poured out of the city to meet the Egyptian assault, the second group struck them from the rear. Caught between two powerful armies, the Canaanite troops were utterly defeated. The Egyptians captured the rebel king and many other members of the nobility, and they looted the city of Megiddo. Thutmose had won a brilliant victory, but at what cost? The Egyptian army had lost thousands of men, and the country was now saddled with the expense of feeding and caring for tens of thousands of prisoners. Furthermore, Megiddo was still a threat, since its massive fortifications were still intact. Despite these setbacks, Thutmose was undeterred. He spent the next 2 years campaigning in Canaan and Syria, and he emerged from it with the region firmly under Egyptian control. In fact, Thutmose's campaign was so successful that historians consider it to be one of the greatest military victories in ancient history. So why did Thutmose III choose to attack Megiddo? Was it just luck, or was there a deeper reason behind it? To answer this question, we need to look at the sources that tell the story of Thutmose's campaign. The main source is the Karnak inscription, which was carved by Thutmose himself to commemorate his victory. According to the inscription, Thutmose was acting on the orders of the god Amun, who had appeared to him in a dream and told him to go to Megiddo. But there are other sources that provide valuable insights into Thutmose's decision-making process. One of these is the Bible, which tells the story of the battle from the perspective of the Israelites, who were allies of the Egyptians at the time. According to the biblical account, Thutmose was advised by his captain, a man named Sisera, to take the northern route to Megiddo, but he ignored the advice and attacked instead. Another source is the ancient Syrian city of Ugarit, which was destroyed by an earthquake shortly after the battle. Excavations at the site have uncovered tablets that contain the personal correspondence of the king of Ugarit. Some of these letters mention the Battle of Megiddo and shed light on the strategies and tactics employed by the Egyptian and Canaanite armies. Putting all this information together, we can construct a picture of why Thutmose chose to take the direct route to Megiddo. First, he wanted to avoid a protracted siege. Megiddo was a heavily fortified city, and Thutmose knew that a siege would be costly in terms of both lives and resources. By taking the direct route, he hoped to catch the city's defenders by surprise and win a quick victory. Second, he wanted to prevent the Canaanite king from raising an army to meet him in battle. If the Canaanite king had been able to raise a large army, the outcome of the battle could have been very different. By taking the direct route, Thutmose eliminated the Canaanite king's ability to raise reinforcements. Third, he wanted to exploit the terrain to his advantage. The Aruna Pass was narrow and winding, which made it difficult for chariots to maneuver. But once the Egyptian chariots reached the Jezreel Valley, they were able to move freely and quickly. This gave the Egyptians a major advantage in battle. Fourth, he wanted to demoralize his enemies. The Canaanite king and his generals believed that the Egyptian army would take the northern route, which was well defended. When Thutmose attacked from the rear, he caught them off guard and broke their morale. Finally, he wanted to demonstrate his own courage and confidence. Thutmose was eager to prove himself as a warrior and as a leader. By attacking the heavily fortified city of Megiddo, he showed his enemies that he was fearless and that he was confident in his own abilities. In the end, Thutmose's bold strategy paid off. He won a decisive victory over the Canaanite army, and he captured the city of Megiddo. The Battle of Megiddo was one of the most important battles in ancient Egyptian history. It established Thutmose III's reputation as a great military leader, and it secured Egypt's dominance in Canaan. But it was also a close call. If Thutmose had not been willing to take risks, he may have lost the battle. But his boldness and his strategic thinking enabled him to outmaneuver his enemies and achieve victory. What do you think? Was Thutmose III right to take the direct route to Megiddo? Let me know in the comments below. Imagine a time when kings ruled like gods and empires rose and fell with the speed of desert winds. Picture the scorching sun beating down on dusty plains where rival kings clashed like thunder, each trying to outdo the other in their pursuit of conquest. Now focus your gaze on a particular place in this historical narrative the fortress city of Megiddo. Even today, its name echoes with tales of valor and endurance. Today, we are going to travel back to ancient times to explore a story that has puzzled historians for centuries. We will delve into the question that has echoed through the corridors of time. How did the city of Megiddo withstand a 7-month siege? Join us on this journey as we unravel the secrets hidden within the ancient walls of Megiddo. The year is 1457 BC, and the sun beats down mercilessly on the parched earth. A mighty Egyptian army led by the formidable Thutmose III, one of ancient Egypt's greatest military commanders, is on the march. Their destination, the strategically important Canaanite city of Megiddo, which stands defiant and proud on a high natural hill overlooking the Jezreel Valley. The Egyptians had been advancing south from Syria, crushing rebellions along the way, and Megiddo, with its stubborn resistance, was the last obstacle in their path to total domination of the region. Megiddo was not just any ordinary city, it was a vital trading hub at the crossroads of important routes connecting Egypt to Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean. For centuries, its rulers had skillfully played rival powers against each other, maintaining their independence. But now the Egyptians, with their chariots thundering like the wrath of the gods, were poised to change all that. And as the dust settled around Megiddo, the siege began. Thutmose, known for his military brilliance, had come prepared. His army, numbering over 20,000 foot soldiers and 2,000 charioteers, was a force to be reckoned with. Around them, the siege engines rumbled, ready to batter the city's stout walls. Among them were mobile towers, ingeniously designed structures that allowed soldiers to scale the ramparts, bringing new meaning to the phrase bringing the battle to the enemy's doorstep. Catapults and battering rams joined the fray, hurling massive stones and shaking the very foundations of the city. In those days, such siegecraft was still relatively new and required a tremendous investment of resources and manpower. The Egyptians, with their skilled engineers and experienced workforce, were among the few civilizations that had mastered this art, yet the Egyptians' confidence might have been misplaced. Before diving into the nitty-gritty of the siege, let's take a closer look at Megiddo itself. This wasn't just a random city. It was a fortified citadel built on top of a steep natural hill. The hill was surrounded by deep valleys, making it naturally defensible on 3 sides. To further bolster their security, the inhabitants of Megiddo had built massive fortifications made of huge stones. These walls weren't just thick and high, they were also adorned with towering watchtowers, which served as both a warning system and a vantage point for archers. Water was a lifeline during sieges, and Megiddo was prepared. Deep inside the city, the residents had dug numerous wells to ensure they wouldn't be caught off guard by a sudden Egyptian blockade. And when the siege began, these wells became even more crucial. While the Egyptians controlled the surface, what they couldn't conquer were the subterranean passages that crisscrossed beneath the city. Tunnels were dug, some as deep as 50 cubits or about 82 feet, allowing the residents to collect water from springs outside the besieged area. This intricate system of tunnels is a testament to the ingenuity and resourcefulness of the Canaanites. They adapted to their environment and turned what could have been a weakness, the lack of surface water, into a strategic advantage. But the real magic of Megiddo lay not in its physical fortifications, but in the hearts of its people. When the siege began, panic did set in. Women, children, and the elderly were evacuated to a safer location behind the main lines of defense. But the men were ready to fight. Under the leadership of their king, a resolute warrior named Susan's Eye, they stood firm against the Egyptian onslaught. Day after day, the Egyptians hurled themselves against the city walls only to be met with a storm of arrows and stones. Each repelled attack fueled the determination of the defenders, turning their resolve into a blazing fire. As the siege dragged on, Thutmose grew increasingly frustrated. His forces were suffering from shortages of supplies, especially water, and the city showed no signs of falling. The Egyptians, with their characteristic attention to detail, had anticipated a swift victory. They had brought provisions for a 30-day campaign, not for a protracted siege. And as the weeks turned into months, they had to rely on foraging parties to sustain themselves, but even this proved to be a risky strategy. The Canaanites, aware of the vulnerability of their besiegers, launched surprise night raids, ambushing the foraging parties and causing significant losses. Amidst this deadlock, a rumor spread among the Egyptian ranks, a rumor that chilled the hearts of even the bravest soldiers. It spoke of a curse placed upon anyone who dared to lay siege to Megiddo. Supposedly, the curse was so powerful that it caused madness and death, striking fear into the hearts of the Egyptians. Now, whether or not there was any truth to these rumors, the mere belief in them had a profound impact. The Egyptians, a pragmatic people, began to question their chances of success. Could they truly prevail against a city seemingly protected by the gods themselves? The final blow came with the arrival of the rainy season. The once dry and dusty plains turned into a muddy quagmire, making it almost impossible for the Egyptian chariots to maneuver. Heavy rains also meant that the city's wells were filled to the brim, providing the defenders with an abundance of water. Realizing that a breakthrough was impossible, the Egyptian king, Thutmose III, made the difficult decision to lift the siege. He withdrew his forces, leaving behind the skeletons of his siege engines and the stench of defeat. In the annals of history, the tale of Megiddo's resistance became a beacon of inspiration, a shining example of how courage and ingenuity could triumph over brute force. Though the siege had ended, the story doesn't conclude here. You see, the Egyptians may have lifted the siege, but they were determined to conquer Megiddo. 5 years later, they returned, this time with an even larger army and more advanced siege weapons. The Egyptians laid siege to the city again, but this time they faced a new obstacle. Leading the defense was a man named Anius, who had taken over from Susan's Ionis, was no ordinary ruler. He had studied the Egyptian siege tactics extensively, learning their strengths and weaknesses, anticipating their moves and preparing counter-strategies. He knew that the Egyptians would try to dig tunnels under the city walls, so he ordered the construction of deep trenches to detect and thwart their efforts. And when the Egyptians began hurling battering rams against the city gates, Anius was ready. The gates were reinforced with iron, making them nearly impenetrable. But the most crucial factor in Megiddo's defense was the element of surprise. Anius's army launched surprise night raids, disrupting the Egyptians' sleep and catching them off guard. In one daring raid, they even set fire to the Egyptian camp, sending the invaders reeling in confusion and disarray. As the siege dragged on, the Egyptians grew disheartened. They were exhausted, their supplies were dwindling, and they were being humiliated by the Canaanites. After 6 long months, Thutmose realized that he had bitten off more than he could chew. Once again, he raised the siege and retreated. Now, you might wonder, why didn't the Egyptians learn from their mistakes? Why did they keep coming back if they knew they'd fail? Well, the answer lies in the heart of ancient Egypt itself. Pharaoh Akhenaten had risen to power with promises of sweeping reforms, including a campaign to conquer Canaan. But the 2 sieges of Megiddo had drained Egypt's resources and the pharaoh's coffers. Now, Akhenaten needed to appease the priests of Amun, who were furious over the neglect of their god in favor of Aten. Conquering Megiddo and ending the troublesome Canaanite kingdom would bring much-needed prestige to his reign. Sadly, the pharaoh's advisors, blinded by his charisma, failed to warn him of the folly of this plan, leading Egypt into yet another disastrous campaign. But as fate would have it, this time, the Egyptians didn't need siege tactics to conquer Megiddo. Betrayal played a pivotal role in the city's demise. According to ancient texts, a disgruntled nobleman named Iru opened one of the city gates under the cover of darkness, allowing the Egyptians to enter unopposed. Some say he was bribed by the Egyptians, others claim he was driven by personal ambitions. But whatever the truth, the city fell and its inhabitants suffered a terrible fate. Many were killed, others sold into slavery. The once proud city of Megiddo was reduced to ashes. So how did Megiddo, a city with strong fortifications, ingenious defense systems, and a population eager to defend their homeland, fall to the Egyptians? Simple, through betrayal. As we delve deeper into the story of Megiddo, we discover that sometimes the greatest threats come not from external enemies, but from within. Thank you for joining us on this journey through time. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to show your support. Together, we can keep these stories alive, ensuring that the tales of valor and intrigue from our shared human history continue to inspire and educate generations to come. The role of chariots and armor in ancient Egyptian warfare, the clash of bronze on bronze echoes through the ages, a testament to the ferocity of combat in ancient Egypt. But have you ever wondered what protected the Egyptian soldiers in the heat of battle? What kept them safe from the sharp edge of a sword or the piercing thrust of a spear? Welcome to our channel, your gateway to the secrets of the past. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into the world of ancient Egyptian warfare, specifically the vital roles played by chariots and armor. Join us as we uncover the secrets behind these mighty tools of war and explore how they shaped the outcome of battles in ancient Egypt. So fasten your seatbelts, history buffs, because we're about to embark on a wild ride back in time. Let's get started. Before we delve into the intricacies of Egyptian armor, let's turn our attention to another critical element of their military might, the chariot. Picture this. The year is 1650 BC, and the Egyptian army is charging into battle, their war cries echoing across the desert sands. At the forefront of this mighty force are the chariots, sleek, powerful vehicles thundering across the battlefield, each one a symbol of Egypt's military prowess. During the early dynastic period, Egyptian armies primarily consisted of foot soldiers who engaged in close combat using weapons like spears and axes. However, around 1650 BC, Egypt came under the rule of the Hyksos, a foreign people known for their advanced military technology, including the use of chariots. Recognizing the effectiveness of this new weapon, Egyptian rulers quickly integrated war chariots into their armies, ushering in a new era of warfare in Egypt. Chariots were not just a means of transportation, but a revolutionary tool on the battlefield. They were lightweight, fast, and maneuverable vehicles drawn by horses and typically carrying 2 or 3 people. The driver controlled the reins, guiding the horses, while one or more warriors equipped with bows, spears, or other weapons engaged the enemy. Sometimes a third person would wield a shield, protecting the crew from incoming projectiles. This innovative use of chariots allowed Egyptian forces to outmaneuver their opponents, delivering swift and deadly attacks from a distance. The Egyptians further improved the design of the Hyksos chariots, making them lighter and more durable. They developed advanced wheel designs that reduced friction, increasing speed and maneuverability. Additionally, the Egyptians used flexible woods like bent timber for the frame, making the chariots more resistant to shocks and stresses encountered on the battlefield. These modifications turned the Egyptian chariot into a formidable weapon, capable of executing lightning-fast attacks that caught their enemies off guard. The speed and agility of these chariots were unmatched, allowing Egyptian warriors to harass and disrupt enemy formations with ease. Moreover, the chariot's range and mobility proved invaluable when pursuing fleeing opponents or when executing hit-and-run tactics. As the Egyptian empire expanded, chariots became an integral part of their military strategy, playing a pivotal role in securing victories in distant lands. One of the most famous examples of the Egyptian chariot's effectiveness can be seen in the Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites in 1270 for BC. Despite being tactically surprised by the Hittite army, Ramses skillfully utilized his chariots to achieve victory. The Battle of Kadesh was a testament to the power of the Egyptian chariot, showcasing its ability to dominate the battlefield when used effectively. As the clash of bronze on bronze echoed across the banks of the Orontes River, the Egyptian chariots thundered into action, their impact shaking the very foundations of the ancient world. Now that we've explored the mighty chariot, let's turn our attention to another crucial aspect of ancient Egyptian warfare, their armor. Just as the chariot was a symbol of military innovation, so too was the armor worn by Egyptian soldiers, a testament to their skill in craftsmanship and their ingenuity in the face of danger. In the early days of Egyptian warfare, before the advent of metal armor, Egyptian soldiers relied on simple leather coverings for protection. However, as weaponry advanced, tougher materials were needed to withstand the sharp edge of bronze swords and the piercing thrust of spears. Around 3000 BC, Egyptians began using animal skins, such as those of cows, crocodiles, and hippopotamus, to create sturdy shields and armor. These hides were treated and hardened to increase their durability, providing some protection against enemy attacks. But as the threat posed by opposing armies grew, so too did the need for stronger armor enter metal. The Egyptians learned to work with metals like bronze and iron, creating helmets, breastplates, and other protective gear that could withstand even the fiercest of battles. These metal helmets were not only useful, but also served as a symbol of authority and power, often decorated with elaborate designs and feathers to intimidate the enemy. But the Egyptians didn't stop there. They also developed composite armor, combining leather, metal, and other materials to create flexible yet resilient protective clothing. This allowed soldiers to move more freely on the battlefield without sacrificing the safety provided by armor. The importance of armor in ancient Egyptian warfare cannot be overstated. It provided soldiers with the confidence and security to engage in close combat, knowing that they were somewhat protected from harm. This was particularly important during the New Kingdom period, when the Egyptian army expanded its influence throughout the Near East, facing new and diverse opponents who wielded a variety of weapons and fighting styles. The use of armor also played a significant role in the development of military tactics. For instance, large shield formations were employed to protect soldiers, especially during the construction of fortifications or in siege warfare. These massive shields, often adorned with paintings of gods or pharaohs, were used to form defensive walls, creating a sense of security for the troops. The armor worn by the Egyptian soldiers was not only functional, but also reflected the artistic skill and craftsmanship of the era. Many pieces were beautifully decorated with intricate patterns, mythical creatures, and scenes from Egyptian mythology. These embellishments not only served to inspire the soldiers, but also showcased the wealth and power of the Egyptian state. In the heat of battle, as the clash of steel rang out and the dust swirled around them, the Egyptian soldiers stood firm, their metal armor protecting them from harm. The combination of the chariot and armor proved to be a formidable force on the battlefield, allowing the Egyptian army to dominate their opponents and expand their empire across the Near East. The strategic impact of chariots and armor on ancient Egyptian warfare cannot be overstated. These innovations allow the Egyptians to outmaneuver their opponents, deliver devastating attacks, and protect their soldiers from harm. Chariots were a revolutionary development that added a new dimension to warfare, enabling the Egyptians to control the battlefield through speed and agility. Meanwhile, the evolution of armor, from simple leather coverings to finely crafted metal breastplates, provided soldiers with the confidence and security to engage in close combat. The use of chariots and armor also influenced military organization, tactics, and even art. Chariots required highly trained teams of horse handlers and weapon users, leading to the development of specialized military units. The need for skilled craftsmen to produce and maintain chariots and armor also contributed to the growth of metalworking industries. Furthermore, the use of chariots and armor is reflected in various works of art, such as the tomb paintings and sculptures found throughout Egypt, offering valuable insights into military life during different eras. The decline of chariot warfare in Egypt can be attributed to several factors. As iron weaponry became more widespread, it posed a significant threat to the wooden chariots, making them less effective on the battlefield. Additionally, the rise of new military powers and changing political alliances led to new warfare strategies that relied less on chariots and more on infantry and cavalry. The late period saw the emergence of the horse as a dominant force in warfare, overshadowing the role of the chariot. Despite their eventual decline, the impact of chariots and armor on ancient Egyptian warfare is undeniable. These innovations played a crucial role in Egypt's rise to power, allowing the Egyptian army to to dominate their opponents and expand their influence across the Near East. The legacy of chariots and armor lives on in the stories and artwork that have survived the sands of time, reminding us of the bravery and ingenuity of the ancient Egyptians and their contributions to the art of war. And with that, our journey through the world of ancient Egyptian chariots and armor comes to an end. We hope you've enjoyed learning about these fascinating aspects of ancient Egyptian warfare. If you want to learn more about the ancient Egyptians or other historical topics, please don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, keep exploring the past and uncovering the secrets of our amazing world. Thanks for watching.